Hello, good afternoon, and you are joining in with the EMD Education on Air. We will give it about a minute for us to start the program, and of course, if anybody is there, you can join in, and we'll just give it about a minute for everybody to join in. So please do bear with us. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to all our viewers. Today's Education on Air features a very highly respected architect, Mr. Larry Brooks. He has presented an EOA with us before, and we welcome him again. He's the president of Practice Flow Solutions, widely known as an expert in improving the flow patterns of medical practices. Larry's 24-year career has specialized in helping private practices and institutions improve the flow of their healthcare. The expertise Larry has developed during his focused career has allowed him to help thousands of doctors increase the number of patients they are seeing. Calm flow patterns to improve the quality of work life for the doctor and staff, all while improving the experience of the patient. Mr. Brooks, it is great to have you again with us for the second time on EMD Education on Air. Please do tell us a little bit more about your firm and, of course, what you will be educating us with today.
Great. Thanks, Lenny. This is Larry Brooks, architect, and Practice Flow Solutions was created really out of the experience of working with practices for like I said, for 24 years. And as an architectural firm, I did this for 18 years with a national healthcare firm, healthcare design firm. And what we found was designing a facility for a medical practice, and especially ophthalmology, is so much different than just designing not only other medical practices, but other buildings. Trying to design an accountant's office or an architect's office or a bank or grocery store, those are completely different than trying to design a ophthalmology office. So as we designed the facilities, we started realizing, because we were specializing in healthcare, that the operational aspects of your practices had so much more to do with how we designed the building than the architecture of the building, of what we wanted it to look like and all that. So that's kind of how we came to really focus in on the operational flow and the space based on that operational flow and how you marry all those things together to get really a successful, not only a successful practice, but also a successful piece of architecture that represents your practice to the community. So that's kind of how we got started in this kind of a focused service line. And I say that because, as an architect, I can pick on my own profession. And for one of the first things we're taught in college is the idea that Lewis Sullivan here came up with, is that form follows function. And his belief was that if a building had a specific need or a function, then that building, the design should be guided by that. So it should support that function, not design something and then try to figure out how to make that whatever it was function in that design. And all too often, as you all are listening in right now, looking at your space, realizing that my form isn't really based on my function. It's my function is being based on my form. So your space is dictating how your patient flow and your doctor flow works, and how everything is kind of moving about in your facility. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk it's kind of two parallel tracks, really. It's for those of you that are in an existing facility. You're not looking to move or any of that stuff. Maybe some minor renovations, but just trying to be more efficient, or trying, is my space really supporting me very well? We're going to talk about that a little bit, and at the same time, we'll also be talking about those practices that typically will find that their space doesn't support them. You've outgrown the building you're in or the suite you're in, and you're looking to either expand it or you're looking to relocate. So we're going to talk about kind of the process and the decision making that you go about to not only assess your current but also plan for the future. And so all through this, and when you're looking at your practice from now on, kind of keep in mind that the function should dictate the shape and the form of things are going on. And so all the decisions in your practice should be based around the practice flow. And so this is more than just patient flow. A lot of people hear and talk about patient flow. This is practice flow, meaning everything in your practice that moves to deal with a patient visit. So in our kind of terminology, a lot of what we talk about is everything from the appointment template to the parking lot to check-in to how patients are worked up, how they're moved from the waiting room to any diagnostics to the exam rooms, how doctors are moving from one lane to the next, how techs move, the scheduling, how you're doing your surgery coordinating and your optical shop if you have that. Every bit of those moving pieces make up what we call practice flow. And as I mentioned, all too often the people that are designing your offices don't understand the magnitude that has on the design that you end up. And and for most of you build facilities once, maybe twice, maybe three times if you're a bigger practice. You're not building buildings on a fairly regular basis. And so too often, unfortunately for you all, you don't realize the mistakes until you're already in it. Because as I said, as an architect, I can pick on my profession. We are taught that we are problem solvers in college. We can design things. We ask our client, what are their issues? What do they need? We will design them a solution to their problem. But just kind of like general surgeons maybe aren't the best to go to for cataract surgery, a general architect maybe is not the best to go to for an ophthalmic facility design. And so I'm going to give you a couple of examples of that real quick, and we'll get into the analysis part of this. On your screen there is a facility that was designed by an architect. Supposedly they had done healthcare before. It was for a two doctor. It was supposed to have two ophthalmologists in it once. And so they had exam rooms across here. Here's your waiting room. You come in, check in here. The doctor also had told this architect she wanted to be able to do cataract surgery in her office. So this is the room that the architect decided was going to be for cataract surgery, her minor surgery room, with the clean and dirty and all that right there. Not understanding ophthalmology, this is the amount of diagnostic space that was dedicated to this practice. Well, if you look at this, just a lot of things popped out at us when we saw this plan. Was the fact that now we have for a very small practice, two doctors at once, we've got two checkout windows. So how are we going to staff? Are we going to try to staff this with one person, two people that then have to move back and forth? And how's that going to work? These are very narrow hallways that people are going to be standing here trying to check out. At the same time, people are going to be trying to come and go. So the throughput here was going to be a very big bottleneck right in that area. The lanes were very narrow, but deeper than what they should be. So there was a lot of things. The tech station was right in the middle, which is fine, but they're really standing in the hallway. So when we started looking at this, we started to say, okay, well, for two doctors at once, is one doctor going to get two rooms and the other doctor getting three? And the doctor at that point said, well, the architect thought we could plan it to where, depending on the volume that day, you could go back and forth. So depending on who was in and how many rooms they needed, the patient volume, we could kind of share rooms. Well, in our experience, doctors have a certain volume of patients they see, and at a certain rate that they see patients. So you've got to make sure they have the space they need for that rate, and because your template, yes, it might change due to no-shows or work-ins for that day. For the most part, your appointment template is set up at a certain rate, and assuming those patients all show, you need a certain amount of space and staff, to handle that rate. So the idea of varying the number of rooms you get from day to day only works is if you're going to have a different patient type that day. So maybe that morning you're going to do all post-ops, so they're very quick visits and you need a lot of exam rooms. Or you're doing an injection clinic you might spread out into, so a bunch of different things. So we saw this plan, gave her a lot of critiques about what was going on, and just to give you an idea, she was already she was in permitting. That building was a brand new building, in permitting, was about to start construction when she walked up to us at the academy meeting. So we started looking at it and saw all the points, and she realized, wow, I'm about to make a big mistake. We couldn't change the shape of the building, but we could change everything on the inside. So on the right is the plan that we redid for her. And the first thing we talked to her about was there was no way you're going to get in this about 50-something hundred square foot building, no way you're going to get an ASC to do cataract surgeries through Medicare. And she was already a part owner of a surgery center down the road, so we were able to counsel her that that's not going to work in this building. One of the things that can kind of jump out at you very quickly is look at the amount of diagnostic equipment she had, all the blue, compared to how much the architect that had done medical now gave her. So a big difference. So you can start to see a lot of things that jump out at you. We created a tech station still central to the two. Now we have 3 rooms apiece based on the volume of patients that each one of these doctors saw, not on the fact that we just needed to be able to fit them in and try to use them as we could. The other thing you notice is the hallways are wider where the traffic is more, and then they get down more to a narrow standard 5-foot hallway where the doctors are working. So instead of being out in the open, very exposed, the doctors here are now much more concise and much more hidden away to be able to just deal with their patients and their staff in this example. The next example I'll show you is another ophthalmology office where again, 2 doctors at once had an optical shop and was thinking about maybe doing some kind of cosmetics like facials or Botox, and just kind of thinking some out of the box type of thinking really for this practice. They had 7 exam rooms. They had 1 here, 2 over here. There's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you had 7 exam rooms around this kind of racetrack process. And the original thought was they had bottlenecks in their current office that they totally didn't like. So they came up with this idea that they were going to do this one-way flow, or with this linear flow, and that some kind of people start to talk about it, where they were going to bring them into an epic room, like a Marco electronic type refraction piece of equipment, maybe do a little bit more diagnostics here, and then they would take them down this hallway and put them in one of these 7 rooms, depending on who they were there to see. But then there was dilating subway way over here, and so what we realized in this is that patients were going to get totally confused. You had tech station way over here, but you had doctors seeing patients over here. You had a doctor that had a room here, maybe one there, maybe one down the hall. So it's hard to see your exam rooms when you came out to know where's the doctor going to go to next. And if a patient came out of this room, how would they know how to get out of this? Now, they've both wrapped back around, but if they start backtracking, now you don't solve your bottleneck issue, and you're making patients go up and down the hallway that the doctor's trying to be and seeing patients on. And there were a whole number of a lot of other issues. I mean, not to mention, to get to the staff lounge, you had to go right through the operator phone call, the phone call center, and being the staff lounge being right off this main waiting and all that was going to put a lot of nice smells of popcorn and lunch cooking throughout the office. So we took that same shape, and one of the things we did real quickly is realize that based on what the doctor wanted to do, they didn't have enough square footage in this box that they were going to lease. So if you notice in our plan, we were able to bump out the demising wall a little bit to give them a little bit more extra square feet. And again, very similar to the last plan. Now, if you notice, we've got 4 rooms. There is no electronic refraction epic here, because over here, what they were talking about doing was doing an epic, but then where were they going to do the history? They were going to do the history in the epic, and that really slows down that whole process of electronic refraction. So we talked to them, and they weren't really sure how they were going to do that, and we said, okay, it makes more sense to go to the traditional route where we've got 4 lanes for a doctor, and the techs can refract and work up in those lanes. And we've got diagnostic equipment both here and here now to be able to support the equipment that they were planning for. And now with the optical in this location, we're able to get an outside door straight into optical, a checkout that was right close to optical, and now instead of this plan, if you notice, there's offices in the flow of patients. We were able to now get this green area back where it's more private. So check in and check out, all the business office doctors in the yellow offices could all come circulate and go back and forth without having to go through the exam rooms and exam pods. So very quickly, kind of 2 operational looks at 2 plans, where if you would have seen this one originally and said, hey, I think that that could work pretty well. I got 2 hallways, I got a nice big open waiting, all those things sound good, but when you start really thinking operationally, they don't always kind of pan out to be efficient as you would like. So how do you get to that efficient plan, and how do you look at your current space to determine, is it what we need, and is it supporting me well? And as Thalini mentioned, I had given another one of these and wrote an article for Entrepreneur.MD back in the spring, early spring, about March area, and we went through a whole process of analyzing patient flow and practice flow and operation. So I won't go into a lot of that today. You'll be able to pull that up and see that from previous webinar, and they're also on our website as well, as far as articles and things like that you can read. But to assess your space, or to make sure, see how your space is supporting you, you've got to look at your current flow. And this is whether you're staying in your current office or you're going to move to a new building. You want to assess what's good and bad about your current flow. You want to look at that, and at the same time looking at your doctor's potential, and be critical about how their time is being consumed. And I'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second. The next part of analyzing your space is you've got to look at your future growth. Are you adding doctors to your practice? Are you adding service? Are you adding equipment? So whatever you're adding, especially if it's doctors, develop a schedule to project out what is it, how many of those doctors are you really going to need at once to give them the proper amount of space, or a proper amount of clinical access time. Because part of that doctor potential is being able to say, okay, they can see so many patients in an hour. This is their potential. If we had all our log jams eliminated, then that will help you determine how many exam lanes they need, and then that way you can multiply those number of exam rooms times the number of doctors you're going to have in at once. So that allows you to start to assess your current space and project for new space down the road. And then the space needs assessment is being able to say, okay, I'm going to need 3 doctors at once. Each one of my doctors needs 4 rooms. I need this amount of diagnostic equipment. I need this much waiting based on my patient volume. And you'll be able to look at your current space and say, okay, is it some way going to be able to efficiently house this space need that I have? And then the last thing, once you understand operationally the flow, the log jams that you have, and how you're going to solve those, then you start designing space. Because all too often what happened in those first 2 case studies, and then time after time after time, and you maybe have gone through this as well, is architects want to jump in. We're creative guys. We want to design. They jump in and will start trying to draw something for you almost immediately, and you have to rein them back in and say, no, look, let's define the target. Let's figure out what it is we're designing first, and then let's start designing to more of a focused approach on how it's going to function. Function follows, or form follows function. So the process is this for your current office, to see what you need to do where you're at, as well as looking at your current office to plan for futures, you've got to observe the flow and do a time study to measure what's going on. And this is your good old-fashioned time study. And like I said, in the previous seminar we did, we went into this a little bit more in detail, but it is focusing on the doctor's time, not tracking the patient through your office, because tracking the patient just tells you how long each stop took. It doesn't tell you whether your doctor has patients ready to see, is their time being used efficiently or not. So you really need to focus on your doctor, then focus on the staff, then focus on the patient when you're doing a time study. And then obviously at the end, when you identify those log jams, look at the magnitude of them to realize, wow, this is wasting a lot of my doctor's time. Then you can start to come up with solutions on how you can solve those and improve your flow from that. And so when you're looking at that time study, you want to compare kind of what their daily rate or their hourly rate is now and be able to project a new potential if you're able to eliminate those things. So for instance, if you were watching your doctor and you noticed they had times when nobody was ready for them to see, how much of that time was there? If you can gain back those bits and pieces of time, how much is that going to save you down the road and be able to add patient visits, and what does that do to your hourly rate of patients coming in your front door? So that's the comparing that to the kind of the historical output or what you're doing right now. And then when you start doing your space assessment, you've got to do that based on, okay, I'm going to delegate these type of tasks from my doctor to my techs. Do my techs have space to do that? Do I have enough techs to do that? Do my techs now are delegating some type of functions to coordinators or patient movers or whatever? Just you got to look at each individual kind of section of your practice from that operational look of that, and so you base your space and your staff need on that potential, because that's what you're trying to get to in all this is what could happen if you had the space and the operational systems to support your practice well. And so once you've done the kind of the space assessment of that part of the potential, looking what your doctor's potential is, as I mentioned, the kind of the future plans of your practice is next. And in this example, on this practice, we've got a 5-doctor practice, 3 MDs, 2 ODs in this practice. And I would tell all of you, I know you've all have different ways that you've designed your template, your weekly schedule of where doctors are when. I would suggest putting it in more of a graphical form, because most I see are not this way, to be able to stand back and look at this and say, okay, my main office, and then critically look at your main office or whatever, however many offices you have, and say, can I support 3 doctors at once? So, okay, if I can effectively support 3 doctors at once. We put their initials in to see when they're in and when they're not, and we can say, okay, I've got some free time here in my two of my pods. I got some excess capacity. My satellite is pretty well saturated to fill up. So you can see I'm only 100%, almost 180% of the 200% of effective or available time. So you're able to look to understand what that is. And then you ask a couple of questions. One is you look at to the existing doctors you have. Do you want to work any more days, any less days? Do we need to add more surgery days? Are we thinking about a satellite? Are we adding other doctors? Those kind of questions. And so in this case, they were looking to add a couple of more doctors, 1 more OD and 1 more MD. So we put doctor number 6 and doctor number 7 into the schedule and put them in days to see, does this make sense? Does this work for us? So in this case, we've put them both into satellite in the main office. So what this told this practice is, okay, our current office with the 3 pods can handle doctor 6 and 7. Will be 100% full every single day, but our satellite, we need more space over here, so we're going to have to expand or renovate, add another pod to our satellite if this is the way we want to go. But before you start recruiting this doctor, before they sign on the dotted line and they show up, about this time of year, where are you going to put these people? And then project out as many doctors as you can if you're looking to do a renovation or a new building, to make sure you understand what the space implications are of that. Because the next part of this space assessment is to make a list of every single space you need and the size of them. So this is first sheet is kind of the basis of this. And so we're going to say we're going to be a 3MD, 3OD practice. And of that, we're going to have 3 doctors seeing patients, 3 MDs seeing patients at once in the facility we're looking at. They need this many of exam rooms each. You know, they need to have tech stations. How many patients an hour are we going to plan that doctor for? So we know that, okay, if we're going to have 3 MDs in at once and they're all going to be seeing around 8 patients an hour, we've got to handle 24 patients an hour coming in our front door. And as we all know, those patients bring family members with them. So we've got to plan for additional seats, not only for the patients, but some of those patients will be exam rooms, somebody will be in the waiting room, they'll have family members. So this is a detailed line item, and to this day, besides the 2 firms I've worked with, I've never seen an architect or a client that's worked with an architect that have been able to produce this as they've done a design. And this is what defines the target. This tells you exactly what you're going to get when you see the plan that the architect puts in front of you. It's a laundry list of every single space you need, the number of them, and the size of each. And then after that, it's just a math equation. Figuring in hallway circulation factor. So after you add up all the spaces you think you need, add an additional 30% to that to be able to get an idea of how many total square feet you need for your practice. And you need to be very, very detailed in this for, think about where are we going to put copiers? Where are we going to put filing cabinets? What about shredders? Where are we, those things have popped up in the last few years, excuse me, like crazy. Counselors, how are we going to do this? Are we going to have surgery schedulers? Are we doing more of the high technology lenses? And then we need counselors that are going to be closer to our exam rooms. And just think about how we're going to do that along everyone. So you'll see each one of these. So just to give you an idea, if you're going to have a scheduler where you're going to sit down with a person, a family, and talk to them, probably anywhere from 65 to 80 square feet. Really, I try to keep it on the 80 square feet per office is a good number. Make sure you have a comfortable space to be able to really sell and counsel those patients. And then you go through every exam room. So we talked about 3 doctors at once. Each one of those we're going to have 3 rooms apiece. And now we know we're going to need 9 exam lanes. They're going to be about 9 by 12 apiece. So we're going to do mirrored lanes. Procedure rooms, tech stations. If we need work alcoves, every piece of now in this case we were doing some epics like Marco refraction stations, but we gave them history rooms in addition to those, so we were able to keep our epics moving. So you got to think through every step of the process of what's going on, from, as you can see, from storage to toilets, all the diagnostic equipment, every single room space in there, list it, tell how many, and then the size of it. Because in this case, you can see all the way down through the administration and janitor's closets, everything you need. This practice needed about 7,100 square feet for this 3 doctor at once practice. So that gives you, now you can start saying, okay, compare that to what I have, or you can use that number to go start looking for space. And when you're looking at space or looking at your space or comparing it to new space or looking for new space, the shape that you have to work with is going to have a lot of input and effect on how well of a plan you can get. And so just kind of talk a little bit about some geometry of space here. As I call this, the snake. If you've got a very long linear practice, this makes it very difficult to be able to get a good plan in, because it depends on where the entry is. If you're coming in on this side, in the middle on the long entry, then a lot of times you're going to end up having to do clinic on 2 different sides, or you're going to have clinic all down here, and you might have business office all down here, because depending on how you start to use space. If you come down on this end, then you've got a very narrow throat to try to get patients down through. And what that typically starts to create is more of these linear hallways with exam rooms lined up down one side, because you don't have a lot of width in your building in the space. So, for a doctor in this case, if you had a kind of a workstation for them and the patients are coming in this end, you've got 40 or so feet of a hallway that doctor walks up and down all day long. So the more the walking that your practice and the people in your office is doing, the less productive, the less efficient, less productive they are. So you want to really start to look at different shapes. But just because the shape gets more square, less long, doesn't mean it's good. And this is a kind of a illustration of your typical multi-tenant, multi-floored building, where on the ground floor you probably come into some lobby, come into the center of the building to hit the stairs or the elevators, and they'll have toilets and things like that. So it's kind of the core of the building. And architects and developers will do this all the time, because now you get all your kind of service areas in the middle, and you've maximized the exterior so you can get all these nice windows, because everybody wants windows. Well, except for ophthalmologists, right? So, but what they do here is and let me stop real quick, because you will hear developers and real estate agents and those folks that are trying to show you pieces of property, and they will tell you that this is an efficient building. Well, efficient to you might mean patient flow and doctor flow and how we're moving people. Efficient to them means that they have very little non-rentable space and a lot of rentable space. That's efficient to the landlord. Or it could be that it's a green building, and so it uses very less energy, so it's an efficient building. So as we talk about productivity, efficiency, let's make sure that everybody's kind of talking the same terminology. So you look at this building and say, okay, this is great. We need, let's say this is a 10,000 square foot floor, and we need 5,000 square feet. Oh, this is going to be great. We got a nice big square building. It's going to be perfect. Well, look what happened when they put the core in the middle. It really didn't make it much of a square. What it did is kind of turn that snake into a snail. It kind of curls up on itself. And so when you do that, then all of a sudden now you've got some issues of, okay, we come off the elevators, we've got to come into our waiting room, and if we're taking 5, 6, 7,000 square feet of this, say, 10,000 square foot floor, my patient's going to come out of the waiting room, and they're going to probably walk and make another turn, and I'll probably end up with some kind of a treatment or diagnostic or exam room way back over here. And so the kind of the otter shaped space that you end up with, the more long and linear it is, the more difficult it's going to be for you to get a nice, concise, really tight floor plan in your facility. So when you're looking at your current office, look at things that are along that path that the patient's taking that don't have anything to do with that current day's patient visit. The administrators, office managers in the audience today, if your office is right up front and the patients walk by it every day, I would tell you that your office is making, I know you want to be close and be in the middle of everything. I typically counsel my administrators to get more into a quieter area so you can manage the practice and get something more diagnostic or something that's patient related along that path, so try to cut down on the amount of walking that patients do. If you're looking at your office and you've got, an example before, if you've got exam rooms that are on one side of the hallway, look to see if you can start to subgroup those to where the doctors aren't walking up and down long hallways. They're starting to walk shorter distances by having hallway exam rooms across the hall from each other. And kind of examples of that would be, if you took that same kind of a plan that we had, or the square building, if you just took that core and moved it to the side somewhere, now all of a sudden we've got a fairly nice open area, probably some structural columns in this building, but we got a nice big open area that starts to allow you to have a much more flexibility with the space that you're doing. So if you've got a typical building, and if you're in a building that's fairly square, and we would tell you that the ratio is typically about 2 to 1 that we want to keep to. So no more than twice as long, or in this case wide. So no more than twice as wide as it is deep. So if you're in a 2 to 1 type of a ratio type building, or you're going to look for space, that's the kind of limits that I would go to. You start getting 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, long to length to width, then all you're going to do is really create much longer flow patterns. Now that doesn't mean that your doctor can't be productive, because you can create, a very, very good, nice, concise exam pod back here, and as long as your doctor is not walking it, they're still going to be productive. But probably what will happen is your overhead will go up, because you will probably end up paying additional staff. You'll have additional staff because you'll have so much walking by the staff going very long distances. If this was much longer and wider, if we were back in that very long snake of a building. So, but in this case, if you have this kind of a layout or a shape, then you can start to look at, as I mentioned before, kind of starting to group these exam rooms. So instead of having them 4 along one hallway or one side of the hallway, if you have 4 across the hall from each other, now look what happens, kind of like the case study we did before. Now we've reduced our doctors walking in half. And I can tell you, if you go back, if you attended the first webinar before, you're going to do this hangout. If you saw that one, or you can go back and listen to it. The time study that you'll do, what you will find is the more time the doctor spends out in this hallway walking, the more times they're going to get pulled off track and start getting distracted and not getting to the next room. So the amount of time that happens out here, after even 24 years of spending countless hours in your all's practices, it still amazes me how much time doctors lose outside the exam room into the hallways. And so it's not uncommon for me to work with a practice and see that we can gain 20, 30, 40% increase in production without changing the amount of effective time they spend in this lane with patients. Almost every bit of that is outside this hallway, because they come out here, they go looking for staff, they go try to find the next patient, they're looking for equipment, they don't have patients ready, they get distracted doing other things. All this stuff happens because we don't have a patient ready for them. So we want to reduce the amount of time they spend out here in this hallway. And that does a couple of things by nesting them. It keeps them out of the hallway, but also now it's a much more concise plan, because you could take that same kind of nesting and say, we're going to be a 2-doctor practice. Now you got 4 on this hallway, you got 4 on this hallway. We can have the doctors' work alcoves connected so they can help each other out. So now you've got these short hallways, but we've got 8 exam rooms on a pretty concise, small area. And that's what you'll see when you start to analyze your practice, or you're going to start to renovate or build new. When you're looking at space when it comes to a medical practice, these are the first areas that you start to look at. Because again, as I said, we can tweak the look of the waiting room and the check-in desk, and we can tweak the checkout and the text, but at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get more output. We're trying to help these doctors that are in this doctor on this hallway spend more time in this room seeing patients and less time waiting on patients, looking for staff, doing things staff could do for them. So whether that's a high volume type of practice, or it is a lower volume, higher technology lens, LASIK, more of and not a concierge practice, but more of that type of a practice, then all that means is we still want to make sure we get that doctor as much time to be with patients. And it's a doctor's job, or it's not their job, but it's their call on how long they want to spend in this exam room. If you're a high volume doctor and spending 6 minutes in that room and your patients love you, then that's great for you. That's your personal style and how you like to manage patients. You might have another refractive surgeon that does a lot of premium IOLs and does all the counseling himself or herself, and they might spend 20 to 30 minutes in this room and only see 2 to 3 patients an hour. That's obviously quite fine for them as well. That's that type of practice they want to run. I think it's my job, your job, anybody's job in the management world is to help that doctor, once they determine what kind of practice they want, help them determine how they get to that. And the main thing is to keep them being distracted and all that. So when you go to that kind of a design process and you're analyzing your space, when it comes to looking at your current practice or looking at a new practice, again, here's the kind of back to that same case study we were doing, where the first thing you want to get into when you're looking at space is not the detail of where every door is and where every piece of equipment is, and that you want to look at it in a much bigger picture to be able to say, okay, how do I generally want my practice? What do I generally need my practice to do? And as I mentioned just now, designing those two pods where the doctors and the techs and the exam rooms are, that's kind of the engine analogy. That's the pistons and the cylinders to your engine. That's what's driving the horsepower to your practice. So let's figure out how we're going to make that work first. All right. Then what you want to do, next thing you want to do is you start going down. You kind of go out from that to think about what's the next thing they need. Well, they need diagnostics to make sure that they get the workup done. So that needs to be pretty central to serve all the doctors in that practice. And you might look at this and go, we've got retina on this side, we've got glaucoma on this side, or we got refractive and retina or whatever. So you might have diagnostics on each side that are closer to each subspecialty using those. Again, that's an operational decision that's driving design in your space need. We've got practices that do multiple pieces of equipment because multiple subspecialties need them. It's a bigger practice and they're further away. Sharing doesn't work out very well. The other thing you'll notice about this is it's the volume, the patient volume. So we were talking 20 people or 20 patients an hour coming in this front door. We're going to have 10 coming down this hallway and 10 patients coming down this hallway. When you start to look at your flow patterns and analyze your space, the higher the volume of patients, the wider that space needs to be. So when you look at your hallways in your office and as you're going forward, think of those just like the streets in your town. You've got interstates that have high volume of traffic, which have high volume of lanes, much wider lanes. You've got city streets, small highways, kind of handle the medium-sized volume. And then you've got cul-de-sacs. You've got small neighborhood streets that handle much lower volume. Those streets are smaller, more narrow. They're 2 lanes or small 2-lane roads. So that's when you start to look at your volume, or you start to look at your hallways in your office. When you start having bottlenecks, this is what you need to start really concentrating on: is do I have the right width? And so, for instance, this hallway that one doctor and one set of patients is on is probably going to be about 5.5 feet wide. Out here, we're going to be closer to the 7, 8 feet wide. Out here, we're going to be 8, 10, 12 feet wide, depending on what all's going on here. So you want to start to keep those things much more wide in their process. And then the last thing you start to look at, or not the last, but one of the things that starts to come into this is how is optical going to play into your, if you have, in this case, we had optical. One of the things they talked about was maybe having extended hours or Saturday hours when the clinic isn't open. So we've got to figure out a place to put it operationally that how it allows it to do that, but at the same time can serve our waiting room when the clinic is open and be pretty close to our doctors, so the doctors can be able to get there if they need to communicate, whether that's the optician going back to see the doctor, or maybe we have an OD on these hallways and they can get into optical, or techs going back and forth. So there's a lot of operational things that you look at. And in this area, what you want to notice is, or in this plan, you notice all patient care areas. We have check-in and check-out or business office functions, but they are dealing with the patient that's there on site that day. This is kind of hierarchy that you go into, not only assessing your current practice, but also designing one. Is you start with a doctor, and then you start with the other diagnostics, and then you start doing the other things that have to deal with the patient: check-in, check-out, obstacle. Obviously, if you're going into an existing building, you've got some entry points that you have to deal with already. So that will, maybe be a constraint. It might be, a hindrance. That might be that you might get into this point and realize that this space doesn't work for you if you're looking at analyzing different spaces. And then after you get the clinical parts that you think you've got, and you've got those in a function that works out well, Then you start thinking about the other non-patient care areas, because even though this building is still fairly deep compared to its width, it's not 2 to 1 yet, but it's approaching the too long. If you notice, what we did was we took all the MD areas, the patient or the non-patient care areas, and put them to the back. So, the patient only perceives this building being this deep. They don't see the rest of this practice that's going on. The other is, if you remember in the other scenario when they had the kind of circular flow for this same practice, all the major traffic for staff was up and down the same hallways that the doctors were seeing patients on. And in this case, now, if you wanted to, the best thing you can do is try to get a back circulation or a secondary circulation. So your check-in, check-out folks, your business office staff, management, doctors, they can all communicate back and forth without having to go to down through hallways, down through clinical hallways, to be able to get from one patient to the next, or from one area to the next. So that's kind of how you would start to segregate off when you start to get into a space that is not as optimal as you would like. And when you do that space needs assessment or do that space needs spreadsheet, pull out all the non-patient care areas that you can put towards the back, and then concentrate on your patient care areas and see what the overall square footages of those are if you're assessing something. So you don't have to go through a full plan like this to tell if a space is going to work for you or not. You could be able to say, okay, I'm going to have, let's say if this was 6,000 square feet, I'm going to have 4,000 square feet of patient care areas. You might be able to just draw a line to see where that is. So, okay, I can put all my doctors, just start doing big bubbles to say, okay, doctors, business office, clinic, and then you start to really see very quickly if the overall space will support the function that you're looking for. So in summary, what your space is it's a reaction to how you should move patients through your office. You don't want how you're moving patients through your office to be dictated by a plan or a space that wasn't set up specifically for your practice. I mean, just think about taking your practice and plopping it down into an orthopedic facility. They're both medical, but they're nowhere near the same as far as the function and the flow. They're both handling patients. They both have doctors. They both have techs and clinical staff and check in and check out, but everything else is quite different. So when you're assessing your practice, you're looking at your volumes, you're thinking about renovating, expanding, or relocating. Really approach it from the operational standpoint of what spaces do I need, and in what flow do I need those to make sure I get the best throughput and eventually optimally the best output from our surgeons. So I hope that helps. I hope you enjoyed today, and I think, Lenny, maybe, I don't know if we have any questions that might need to be answered.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Brooks, and thank you for educating us with all that information today. And yes, you do have some few questions, so I will give them to you. And the first one is, what would you say are the biggest pitfalls of not doing a proper, accurate operational flow assessment?
The biggest pitfalls to that really is not reaching the goal, or not reaching your optimal output. Because if you don't do the operational assessment, it's very hard to understand whether it's changes you want to make to your current office or designing a new office, whatever the situation you're in. So if you're thinking about designing a new facility and you don't want to do an operational assessment of what you have, you say, well, I just need a new building. You've got to, we learn from the past. So you've got to be able to learn what's causing, you've got to be able to identify the amount of time your doctors are losing now, because that potential patient power rate is going to dictate your space need and your staff need in a new office. So if we don't know what the potential is from doing an operational assessment, or you don't know, then you won't be able to really design that new office to be as optimal as it can be.
Okay, we'll move on to the second question. Would you say a good number of practice spaces or offices you visit are not designed to serve and support main functions of that practice or specialty?
Say that again, Delaney? I'm sorry.
Would you say a good number of practice spaces or offices you visit are not designed to serve and support the main functions of that practice?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, as I've done this for 24 years, the vast majority of spaces that practices are in aren't set up well for their function, and that isn't always because they weren't originally set up well. We've been into practices a lot of times that you look at the practice and you say, well, if this was the little 2-doctor practice that was back in 1995, this would work out. This would be a pretty nice laid out little office. But since 95, they've added 3 or 4 doctors, and then they've cannibalized storage rooms, and now they don't have a waiting room that's big enough, and their managers working off of carts back in the in the staff lounge or whatever. So there's kind of two answers to that. Is one, there are a lot that are just not designed well, and that goes back to kind of what we were covering here. That ophthalmology is, we do all specialties at Practice Flow Solutions. Ophthalmology is by far the largest specialty we deal with, and it is by far it's not as hard for us, but it is the most difficult when it comes to looking at all the different specialties, because all the different flow patterns that ophthalmology has, from whether it's from optical or the different diagnostics, or it's the different subspecialties that need the different diagnostics. It's now we're getting into kind of the high technology premium patient, kind of the cash base or the customer base type of flow patterns that you have to deal with. And so when you have those just myriad of flow patterns and access points and all the communication that goes with it, a lot of architects, or almost all architects, don't understand the nuances of that. So that's why your practices aren't designed as well as they could be. And then, as I said, as the other is, just blaming you all, the practices not being very good at projecting out future need. Too many times I'm either doing a webinar like this, or I'm teaching at one of your academy meetings, and administrators or doctors will come up to our booth on the exhibit floor, or they'll come up to me after a course and say, hey, I've got this doctor coming on in June. They're going to be ready to see patients coming in August, and I don't have a place to put him in. Can you help me? So or I hear managers all the time say, hey, Larry, my doctor just bought this X piece of equipment at the academy. I got to figure out a place to put it. What can you do? What can you help me with? Or, they bought the Marco Epic, and so now we're changing our whole refracting process. So that starts to implement, or that starts to affect how your floor plan is perceived to be laid out. So there's all kind of things, but yes, absolutely. I rarely go into one that says, wow, this really works well. Because when we do our flow assessments on site, we're both trying to help them. Typically, it's when they're looking for a new facility. We're helping them short term to see if there's some small things they can do short term while they're renovating or relocating or whatever they're doing. And rarely do I say, you really don't need this new building. We can make some changes right here, and your building would be perfectly fine. That does not happen very often.
Okay, let's move on to the third question you have got today. Can you give me some key points to keep in mind when planning a practice renovation or expansion?
Key points. Well, it all depends on what you're expanding, what you're adding to it. I can tell you that if you're looking to expand a practice, a physical plant, a facility, typically practices grow in three directions. So let's say if you're needing to add exam rooms, you're adding doctors. So okay, we're going to add clinical space. Well, if we're adding clinical space, more than likely that means we're for sure going to be adding patient volume. And more than likely, unless your waiting room is way oversized, you're going to have to expand your waiting room. And if you've got more doctors and more patient volume, that means more business. So typically that means unless you're outsourcing or going to change the way you're doing things, that means you're going to have to grow your business office. So when you start looking at a renovation, you kind of start to think out of it in kind of a three-legged stool there and go in different directions. Because if one of those legs goes away, that stool does not stand up well. So think about it in that direction. And then the other part I would say is as you're renovating, don't always really concentrate on those non-patient care areas to see if you can get those out of the way in this renovation. Because a lot of times what we will do is we will take let's say if we're going to expand a facility, we might take administration and what I call soft space, so doctors' offices and the administrator's office, maybe some old paper chart storage that's now you've gone electronic. You start to look at some of those areas that you say, okay, I can reclaim those, and then I got to add on to my building to build doctor's offices or a staff lounge or admin or a call center or whatever it is you need there. So kind of look at it from those two different directions of what you can maybe achieve in a renovation. They are not easy because all that being said, more than likely, I've never seen one yet, but you always have to stay open, seeing patients while you're making those renovations. So it's a very phased process. It might take 3, 4, 5, 6 phases to get something accomplished during construction.
Okay, Mr. Brooks, the final question. How much of time do you take to do a space assessment, and give me an idea of the fee for it?
I figured that was going to come up eventually. The amount of time and fee both are based on the size of the practice, so that's a very hard question without knowing the size of the practice. But let's assume it's 3 to 4, 5 doctor practice. That normally would take us about 3 days to do the on-site flow assessment, and on our website, if you are curious about it, it's called a practice flow assessment. So we do all the operational flow, look at space and all that. There are no plans involved in this type of a service because we strictly focus on function and the analysis and the assessment first, because we don't know what the answer is going to be. But typically 3 to 5 doctors we can do in about 3 days, and we typically charge $2,000 a day plus travel expenses. So I think that's the first time I've actually quoted a fee on one of these. So I normally tell you to call me, but that's in general about what we would expect.
Well, I hope the person who asked that question got the proper answer they wanted. Thank you once again, Mr. Brooks, for your time spent with us on this second education on air. And we are really hoping to bring you back again. Until then, of course, our time has run out. And thank you very much for all the viewers who were here. And thank you for all the questions. And until we meet you again with an education on air, it's goodbye from us. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.